This morning, we are sharing kind of introduction to project-based learning, and really with a focus on kind of like, how do we start small? So when Susie and I were kind of brainstorming the ideas for this workshop, for this webinar, we kind of recognized the challenge that a lot of teachers face in kind of feeling like PBL is too large and overwhelming. And so like, how do we start small and kind of ease our way into project-based learning is kind of one of the themes of our webinar this morning. So let me stop that. Okay, so what we're doing today, or this morning. So we're going to start by kind of diving a little bit into what project-based learning is, and then also kind of compare it a little bit to an idea of just doing projects in our course. And so kind of what PBL is, what PBL is not. We'll experience project-based learning. I'll go through kind of a quick introduction to a project and putting you all in the role of students so you can kind of experience what PBL is from the start with a project launch. Susie will share a little bit of her story, her journey with project-based learning, and then we'll kind of wrap up sharing some resources, but also identifying key features and design principles of project-based learning. So like what some of the bigger ideas of project-based learning. Let me real quick, I'm going to share a PDF of.
Yeah, Kevin, I shared the link in the chat.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. And then if anyone wants it, the PDF will be there momentarily. So let's introduce ourselves. So I'm Gavin. I am an assistant professor in secondary education at Cal State University Fullerton. My story kind of with project-based learning, during my PhD work, I was brought onto a project funded by Lucas Education Research, and their big mission at the time was project-based learning. And so I worked for a number of years on advanced placement PBL courses in social studies, and then multiple courses in science. And then have continued that work working with different organizations in PBL since then. Susie, how about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Susie. Good to see you everyone this morning. I have been a math teacher in the Anaheim Union High School District for the last 20 years. This is my 7th year at Oxford Academy, and I taught 13 years prior to that at Brookhurst Junior High School. And I was very fortunate that I started my career at Brookhurst Junior High School because at that school, like a lot of students were not necessarily just motivated by having good grades. So it really forced me and challenged me to see ways to how to engage my students by making like learning math more relevant. And at the time, like I didn't even know like what I was doing was like PBL, but I used a lot of elements and components of PBL, and I saw like firsthand the impact that it made on my students. So since then, it was like almost impossible for me to go back the way that I used to teach, because like I saw how much difference it made, and students really saw the value in learning math. So I'm happy to share my journey and experience with you guys today.
So we'd actually now like to know a little bit about all of you. So if you can, please, in the chat, type your names, the pronouns you use, your affiliation, either school or district, your role. So either, it'd be lovely to know if you're teaching at a grade level, what grade level, what subjects. If you're not in a classroom, what's your role? And then it'd be great to know what your experience with project-based learning is. So one being very minimal experience, you kind of maybe have heard the idea, but haven't really explored it too much, and 5 being you're doing project-based learning and like all the time, and kind of just looking for a few more resources with project-based learning. So take a second, and then you can go ahead and hit that enter into the chat whenever you're done. Great, thank you all. And so as everyone's kind of finishing that up, we've got a new chat prompt for you. And so this one, though, please wait and don't hit enter. I want to give you a minute or so to kind of do some think time of this. But I think often we deliver curriculum, and not often enough do we pause and really kind of think about what do we want our students, who do we want our students to become after engaging with our curriculum? In what ways do we want them to kind of change and kind of exist in the world a little differently? So think about, what do we want our curriculum to do? Who do we want our students to become after engaging with our curriculum? And just kind of stew on that for a second. And then when you kind of have a few answers, and those can be one-word answers, they can be sentences. Please no paragraphs or longer. But and when you got those ideas, go ahead and type them in the chat. But please wait on hitting enter. So and then when I'll give you a prompt, and we can all hit enter, and we'll get that nice waterfall of ideas. Take about another 30 seconds. So if you haven't typed anything in the chat without hitting enter yet, go ahead and do that. Okay, so now I'll let me count down from 5. When I get to 1, go ahead and hit enter, and we'll see all of our ideas. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, enter. Okay, let's take a second and just read over what others have put in. And so just some things kind of want to point out, and I think any curriculum can do this, or maybe not any curriculum. Many curriculums can do this. But I think a lot of these ideas lend themselves particularly well to project-based learning. So some of the things I'm seeing is kind of enthusiastic learners, kind of wanting students to be active learners. So not, and so we can kind of, I think it's important to think about what's the opposite of, so like versus passive, sharing their knowledge, being reflective and thoughtful, using tools in a flexible manner. So kind of thinking like adaptive transfer to other learning environments, critical thinkers, compassion and purpose, reflectful, and so again, like using tools. So we have like, let's keep all of these ideas in mind as we think about project-based learning. And I think it's also super important if, as we explore project-based learning on a deeper level, to really stay true to this, because we can lose any curriculum, we can lose these values that we have for our students. And so we need to kind of keep them at the forefront of any work that we do. So next, let's kind of think, we want to introduce kind of some ideas around what project-based learning is and what the purpose of project-based learning is. I do want to note that there are, kind of different camps in project-based learning, and we're trying to bring a few together, but there are other perspectives. And we won't even get into like problem-based learning and stuff like that. Happy to chat later on about any of this stuff, but just to know kind of, we are presenting a certain perspective on project-based learning, and there are other perspectives slightly different out there. So we wanted to kind of, it's valuable to give a brief description or definition. And this is adapted from the Buck Institute, or aka Pbl works. And so Pbl is an inquiry-based teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by actively engaging in complex and real-world tasks as they investigate and respond to authentic, engaging, and complex question, an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. And there's tons we could deconstruct there, but one thing we particularly wanted to attune everyone to is the teaching method. That this is like, there is project-based learning curriculum, but often that overshadows that Pbl is a inquiry-based teaching method. And like, I think that is part of our angle of how to make Pbl, like, how can we start small with it? Susie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's the part that I wanted to also highlight, because like, it's a way of teaching, and it's a way of organizing your instruction and designing your curriculum so that it's really authentic and meaningful for the students. It's not doing something, but it's just like the foundation of the way you teach and the way you plan your instruction.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of provide a framework too, but for how we're thinking about like kind of it as a method, and kind of the way that as a teacher, our teaching method engages with the strategies we use and the way we enact curriculum. So I wanted to present the two images. The first is an image of kind of the timeline of teaching when you do projects. And typically that means we front load all of the content and what we view as the valuable information that students need to learn. That can be through lectures, practices, more lectures, textbook activities, labs, like different things, class discussions. And then at the very end, you've learned all this stuff, now do something with it, do a project. And we're contrasting that with the idea of project-based learning, in which everything is in the service of the project. So we introduced the kind of in the introductory task, kind of what is the question or the problem we're wrestling with. And then we might have a lecture, but it will always be in the service of, so now in order to solve this problem, you need to know, and then we give the lecture. Or that's really interesting. Now let's do a lab on that. Or, and so kind of everything structured within the framework of the project. So they're doing the project throughout. And another metaphor that I'm way into food metaphors in my life, and we won't analyze that, but is kind of the idea of project as the dessert versus project as the main course. And so really we are aiming in our definition of project-based learning as projects as the main course, so that we're kind of constantly doing them. Some kind of ideas around this is kind of thinking about when a project is a dessert, it's an add-on. It's kind of focused only on the product, following directions of the teacher, kind of, and on and on. Versus when it's a main course, it's really kind of driven by student inquiry. There's students focusing on kind of what can they design within the project. There's constant real world application. So earlier there was that, like, how do we flexibly kind of apply the tools that we're learning to new situations? There's been some really lovely research that has shown how project-based learning promotes adaptive transfer for students. So that they're not just learning for a test, but they're able to apply it to new scenarios, new problems, because they're working on real world problems in their courses. So now let's experience some project-based learning. So I want to give you some framework. So you are all students in an AP environmental science course. We're about midway through the school year. You've already experienced two projects. One is called Eco Footprint. And in that project, as you might remember, like you analyzed your family's eco footprint. You looked at your water use, your trash use, kind of your energy consumption, and you proposed plans for your family. And you're currently in the process of collecting data to analyze the impact of the plans that you proposed. Then we moved on to My Community Ecology, and we looked at kind of environmental science and kind of sustainability at the community level, and proposed solutions in groups to different organizations at the community level. And so now today we're entering into our food systems project. And so just to start, I wanted to have you look at these two apples, and either in the chat or feel free to kind of unmute. Can you share a little bit about what differences do you see between these two apples, the apple on the left, the apple on the right? I'm not going to tell you anything about the apples just yet, but what do you notice? What differences do you see between the two apples? And again, feel free to either unmute and shout something else. We're a small group, or type in the chat. Some things I'm seeing in the chat so far. So the apple on the right appears to be shinier than the apple on the left. So there's dents in the one on the right. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So there's possibility, and I think it's great to kind of like, we don't know the stories of these apples, but to kind of come up with some wondering. So, so it's possible the apple on the left came just straight from the tree, which then I want to kind of maybe infer a little bit. So then thinking maybe that didn't happen to the one on the right. Maybe the one on the right has, had a little bit more time away from home since it came off the tree. What else? What other kind of things do we wonder? The one on the left looks more delicious. Interesting. I like that observation. Why does it look more delicious? Anyone? More natural looking. Okay. So not so waxy. Okay. So what do you think is there anything we can infer based on kind of what we're starting to observe about these two apples, about kind of what's their story? What do we think? If I was going to, or maybe another question, if I was going to tell you one of these apples is more sustainably raised than the other, which would you guess? Do you think it's the one on the right or the one on the left? So question, like the one on the left might be organic. Any other thoughts? More the one on the left. So what do we mean? Like, so let's unpack that though. I mean, I threw the term out, but like, let's unpack that together. Like, so if something's organic or sustainably raised, what do we mean by that? Or more sustainable? Let's use that term. So if one apple is more sustainable than the other, in what ways is it more sustainable? Doesn't harm the environment? Let me throw something else out there too. I mean, like just from the comments in the chat so far. So if the one on the left, yeah, so like Katie just put in, like, so how far has it traveled? So if it's spent longer off the tree, so that means that it's probably, possibly, we're making a lot of guesses about these apples, and that's great. And so, but like maybe it's traveled further. So sustainability, we're thinking about not just the apple, we're thinking about like the environmental impact of that apple. So like that, has that apple been driving in a truck for thousands of miles? If it's been driving in a truck, I think Erica posted, maybe, there's chemicals there. And so like partly that's like, maybe to unpack that of like, partly those chemicals are possibly to preserve it. And possibly, like, I love that question of like, is the apple in season? So like, again, like maybe expanding what would naturally be a season for the apples, or if it's not in season locally, then how are we getting that apple to us? Why else might it be more shiny? Let's think about that a little bit. The one on the right. Why would, so maybe there's preservatives and kind of things to keep it healthy for that long car ride. What else? Wax coating, brighter, like those, yeah, that light is just shining right off of that apple. So, kind of there's a genetically modified, so maybe it's bigger, maybe it's waxier, like there's a concept of beauty that we're having with this apple of like, so someone decided that in terms of like mass consumption, that apple on the right is going to be bigger, it's going to be shinier, that's what people want. So some other things, and kind of I'll guide us a little bit more for the sake of time, that we'd want to think about is, so who's involved with that apple? So like how many people are involved? So if that apple is traveling from Eastern Washington, then, kind of you can start to think about who is all involved in that. But we need to unpack all sides of that. So both who is involved, but also like then who is benefiting economically from that? Is there just one individual benefiting economically? If that apple's selling for about the same amount though, then how is that money being spread out? Who's receiving that money? So then we kind of need to think about that level of sustainability. And so like, you all can step out of your role of students, and I'll share kind of where the class would go from here. So in the project launch, we have a task that anyone has access to. There's not, it would help if we, kind of with our previous two projects we've been introduced to ideas of sustainability, but had we not, there's still an access point. Everyone's getting interested, and really we're making complex this idea of sustainability. And so that is kind of the what we then kind of continue with, thinking about food and sustainability for the remainder of the project. That's the kind of the big idea of it. And so then from there, students look at their food shed. And so they go home and identify kind of different foods and kind of different ingredients that they have at home and realize, and where kind of identify where does it come from. And then they come, so that's their homework that night. Next class, they come to class, share about their food shed, and then they're put in the role of farmers. And so at that point, they need to identify a sustainable crop that they're going to grow, and they create a farm. That farm then iterates throughout the project, where they then get new problems to think about. So they design their farm, then they are given who they're selling to. And so if they're growing organic apples and then they're selling to McDonald's, or they're selling to Ralph's supermarket, or and then they add livestock, then they learn about how their access to water, and on and on. And so kind of it gets more and more and more complex, and we kind of support their thinking and becoming more complex over time. All right, let me hand it over to Susie.
Thank you, Gavin. That sounds like a really fun and like really involved project, challenging but fun at the same time. Okay, so I'm gonna start my story of my PBL journey. So I was never like formally like trained in PBL, and it's just like I just learned from like trial and error, and just authentically and organically, like how my students responded and reacted to different things I did. So I'm gonna start with part one, why PBL. Like I said a little bit earlier, as a math teacher, we always hear like students saying like, when am I gonna ever use this? Or, but then that's one thing, like, and as a teacher, you might say like, or think, oh, the student is just being lazy, or they're just like coming up with excuses, or, they're just not motivated enough. But then as a parent, I have a son, and when my son was about like 4th grade, he was doing his math homework and I was helping him next to him. And he said, Mom, why doesn't math solve its own problems? Why do I have to solve it for them? And like, I kind of paused when I heard that, because like, he was like, honestly, just like not really understanding why all these math homework or questions that were saying like, oh, Sam wants to do this, and what should Sam do? Or find X, like it's like more like a command, and it feels like there's this math dictator or math monster just making them do work, like labor for them. And then I realized, wow, that's how students actually feel. Like what teachers or the textbook writers think is like real or real world application, like it may not feel like that for the students at all. So I kind of came up with this phrase with my students, like, you guys don't work for math, make math work for you. And Dr. Gutierrez, in her speech about rehumanizing mathematics, said it in a better way. She said, humans in the service of mathematics, or instead of humans in the service of mathematics, mathematics should be in the service of humans. And that shifting mindset really helped my students to see like the purpose of learning math, and they didn't feel like they were doing the work for math, but they were learning math so that they can use math to do the work for them, or to answer the questions, or to solve the problems that they had. And that's where PBL came in. I'm fortunate to work in a district that really understands this idea. And one of the core values at Anaheim Union High School District says education must work for students and not the other way around. I want you to take a few seconds to think about this quote, and like maybe share in the chat, like, what does this mean to you? Because this same sentence may mean differently to different people or different educators, depending on their context. And think about what might this look like in your classroom. And since I cannot see the chat when I'm presenting, Dr. Tierney can moderate the chat and share please feel free to interrupt and speak up. Education must work for students and not the other way around. Okay, I can click the chat now. It needs to be meaningful for the students. Thank you, Erica. To me, this means that we as educators need to include students in determining what is important for us to study and focus on. Their input helps drive instruction. Their input helps drive instruction. And Erica shared students engaged in solving problems and explaining their thinking. Thank you. Okay, so then I'm going to get into part two, like how do we do this? I have been like sharing my PBL journey with other math teachers in the past, and we like group of math teachers got involved in planning for PBL, and they spent like a week or even like a longer time to plan their PBL, project-based learning unit. And then the school started, and when I checked back on them, like not many of them actually implemented or actually carried it out. And I was thinking like, why is that the case? That because they were invested and they were motivated to try this, but then if you look at this image, the importance of small steps, like a lot of times like PBL, project-based learning, feels like really overwhelming. And it's really hard to take that first step because that's just feels like so far to reach compared to what we are used to doing. So I wanted to today really emphasize the importance of taking small steps. And I broke it down to these 4 ideas, and they don't necessarily have to come in these like order or anything. You can just pick any part of these 4 and try something. But I think it's super important for us to try it like as soon as possible, because I don't know if you guys have heard, but like the research or statistics show that when teachers attend or participate in a professional development, and they get some ideas or strategies, but if they don't implement it within the next week, the chance of them ever implementing it goes like significantly low. So I hope from what I shared today, like it will spark some ideas, even though my experience is limited to the math classroom. I believe you guys are the experts in what you do with your own students, and hopefully find ways to make that connection and tweak it, or just spark some ideas from what I'm sharing today. So first is to build a classroom culture and attend to student identity. And I just want you to feel free to share your ideas or reactions for what I'm sharing in the chat. And your insights and ideas are really valuable because I don't really get to hear what other people think about these, and maybe like about how they may apply in different settings outside the math classroom. So I'm really curious and interested in hearing your reactions and your ideas as I'm presenting. So here's one activity that I did at the beginning of school year last year with my 8th graders. And I asked, my students are sitting in groups, and I asked them to come up with as many mathematician names that you can in your table groups. And I gave them maybe like 3 or 4 minutes to kind of brainstorm and come up with the names of mathematicians. And you can think to yourself right now how many mathematicians you can think of that you can name. And guess how many was the most that any group came up with? Can you take a guess? Can you share in the chat? 2 to 3, 3, 10, 1. Yeah, most table groups actually only had 1, and the most was like the highest number was 3, and they were Albert Einstein, Pythagoras, and I think Archimedes. So it was really, that's what I kind of expected. Like if you ask any student, like, can you name like athletes or magicians, they can name so many. But when you ask them to name like mathematicians, they don't really know many. And that's how dehumanizing like math instruction has been. Like these math, formulas or ideas are developed by human beings, but then we really don't know much about them. So what I did was I introduced them to different mathematicians with different backgrounds, and I shared their stories, which are really fascinating because growing up as a student, I was really fascinated in reading about these mathematicians and their biographies because they're really like interesting people, and a lot of times they overcome a lot of barriers and obstacles in their lives, and they have this pure love for mathematics, and they describe math as like such something so beautiful. But how often do our students experience that? So I, share some videos of these mathematicians or their stories or quotes of these mathematicians with my students. Then it led into this like mini research project I called my mathematician research project, and I had students start sharing their own math story, what their math journey has been, and do you have any math hero? Who do you consider as a mathematician in your own life? Then went into part B, my math heritage. So I wanted them to have some kind of role model from their own background, their own cultural background, or anybody that they could really make connection to, personal connection to. And also it allowed students the opportunity to talk to their parents about their backgrounds and how they use math in their life. So one student here said they learned that her father in Mexico built his own house and used math in doing so. Another student found this mathematician from Vietnam, and he was able to really find that connection with her and inspired by doing that. And also like learned about the different characteristics that these mathematicians demonstrated. And this really helped kind of set the foundation for my students to make that connection to math and mathematicians. And they started seeing themselves as like more empowered, and they kind of felt the sense of pride from their own culture and make that connection. Like these different mathematicians, they had like different backgrounds. Some were like ex NFL football player, or they were like artists and at the same time mathematicians. So they were able to see like, kind of go outside that stereotype. And this year with my statistics classes, with mostly 12th graders, I kind of did a similar thing, but this time I asked them to draw a statistician because we're learning about statistics, and I wanted to kind of examine their idea of what statisticians look like. So they were given like 3 quick minutes to sketch the drawing really quick. And I want you to kind of imagine yourself to draw like what image do you think of when you think of a statistician? And surprisingly, my students came up with very, very similar looking people portrayed in their drawing. So they were either white male with very little hair for some reason, or Asian male. And they kind of look all kind of boring and with glasses. And it was really interesting because like my class was like about 90% minority students, and at least half of them being female. But about 80% of the statisticians that they drew were of white, and the other 20% like maybe Asian, and over 90% of the statisticians that they drew were male, although half of my students were female. And none of them drew like one female statistician of color. So that was kind of shocking. And we kind of had a discussion as a class, like, why is it important that we have different people representing different backgrounds in a job like statistician or data analyst? and what role do they play? They play a big role in like decision making using data. And if only one type of person or group is represented in that decision making, like how would that impact others? So then next, and I'm hoping as I'm sharing this again, you guys are kind of inspired and sparked some ideas on how you can do this with your own students or in your own context. Second is daily or weekly routine. And this is like, I call it like problem day or math talk or stats talk. And it's something that helps students to kind of build the skills and have that norm of being okay with sharing ideas and taking risks. So this is the math talk example. So I will choose some prompts where it will have like multiple entry points so they can solve it using like different approaches and something that's kind of relevant to students or something that's interesting to students. And what's powerful about math talk is I give them the time. There's this certain structure of implementing math talk strategy. So I give them like 1 or 2 minute think time once I pose the question to them. And during this think time, it's individual think time, sacred. They cannot share with others. They cannot do anything else. But for those 1 or 2 minutes, they have to just think on their own. They're not interrupted of their thinking by others sharing their answers or thinking before they get their chance to think on their own first. And then I give them like 30 seconds to a minute for them to share in their small groups about the different ideas or strategies that they used. And it's perfectly okay if they didn't finish solving the problem, but it's like, what were you thinking? What kind of approach did you take? And then after they had the chance to share in small groups, are open it to the whole group and they're share with the whole group. And as a teacher, my role is to kind of stay neutral because I want the authority of mathematical thinking to come from the students instead of me telling them, oh, that's correct. Yes, that's right. Like I want students to take that role and have that authority to decide for themselves. So I just transcribe what they said and I give credit. Okay, Johnny said this. Okay, this approach, what do you think about this? Do you agree or disagree? How do you want to change? And, you know, I can either call on students randomly or ask for volunteers. And if I call on a student randomly and if they don't have the answer, they still have the time to think on their own. So you're thinking about something, what did you think about? What did you think about trying? And then from there, we can kind of work as a team, as a class to, okay, what do you think we can do after this step? Or how can we revise this thinking and compare different ways of thinking and different perspectives and different approaches. And by doing that, students feel empowered and they feel like they are heard and they understand that there's not only one way of solving the problem and different perspectives are really valued and diverse ideas. And it's really kind of fascinating for students to realize that other people, their friends, were thinking like a different way that they never would have thought about. And as a teacher, a lot of times I'm like fascinated by what they share and how they think and the creative ways of them solving problems too. Similar to that, with my stats students, I try something called Graph of the Day or Data Talk. And here I will share some relevant data and graphs with the students. And I ask them, like, what do you notice and what do you wonder? And there's no one correct answer with this question. It's very open-ended. And also I ask them to think about what is this graph telling you and not telling you. So these are the little things that I do routinely with my students and really helps them to be prepared to be independent thinkers and critical thinkers and to appreciate diverse ideas and perspectives in a way that's with a topic or data that's relevant to them, that's interesting to them. Next is, okay, I need to speed up. Okay, next is like modeling tasks and problem-based learning. So this is like more like a 1 or 2 day lesson that mimics or that has the components of like a PBL unit, but in a manageable way. So it's not like something that takes like 2 months, but it would take like 1 class period or maybe 2. So these are some examples. So students have like different ways of like applying what they learned in their own lives, and they come up with their scenario, or they find an area that they're curious about in their own life, and apply what they learned in class to solve that problem. On the right, you see like I kind of built from the problem of the day, where we were learning about the volumes of cylinder, like cone and sphere. And I had them kind of try, like when you have a piece of copy paper, would making a cylinder like the short way or the long way have a bigger volume? And they were like really engaged, and then they tried different ways to solve that. And then we extended it to like the different types of sinkholes in the world, and share some pictures. And I asked them, like, have you seen a sinkhole? There was like one in Fullerton a couple years back, and like students were sharing like, oh, when I visited Sri Lanka, like I saw this sinkhole and I was so close to it. And then we talked about like, what shape are these sinkholes? And then we watched some videos that shows like more detailed pictures, images of the sinkhole, and we like came up with the idea. It's not a perfect cylinder, it's not a perfect cone. It's more like half of an egg shape or like a saucer shape. And we talked about what kind of formula can we use that to find the volume of that, to find out how much soil is needed to fill that up. And they were able to come up with like their own formula, combining the different formulas they were exposed to, such as like cylinder, cone, and sphere. And it was like a 1-day kind of thing, but it led to like really rich exploration with the students. With my stats students, I did like this, like a mini task where students decided or picked a topic that they were personally passionate about, and then they researched the data about that topic, and they came up with like creative ways to visualize that data, so that instead of just using technology, they were asked to like really be creative, so that it's more authentic for the audience, and it's more interesting to look at. And they came up like with these like different, like really cool, creative looking graphs and infographics. And this is the part of my classroom where new students come in. They always, are glued to this wall, and they are so interested in looking at the different graphs. And you can imagine if these were just done with like Excel or a spreadsheet, like, it would be not as authentic or interesting for students to look at. Finally, if you are ready or want to start planning for a PBL unit, I am currently doing that right now. So I'm going to share what I have done in the last couple of weeks. So I often like share different quotes from mathematicians or other people that kind of spark their ideas. And I emphasize, in mathematics, the art of proposing a question is much more important than just answering the question. And students are not used to seeing that, because they are often just asked to answer the question, but not raise a question. And this is important for PBL, because their own question is going to be the driver to do this project-based learning. And a lot of times students are not given a lot of opportunities to come up with their own question or formulate their own questions. And so, I use like different videos or different like articles with some relevant data, and have students kind of share their thinking. Like after watching this video about educational equity, we shared about like, what do you think? What resonated with you? What do you believe in? How do you want to change what's happening? And what ideas do you have? And students come up with like really cool ideas, and I'm like really impressed. And they share with each other, and they comment on each other's posts, and it's a really safe place for them to kind of bounce ideas with each other and understand each other's like perspectives. So then after that, they were asked to come up with their own driving question related to educational equity. And they came up with like, we're learning about bivariate data and linear regression, scatter plots, and correlations. So they came up with different things that they were familiar with or they were interested in learning about to explore the correlation or relationship between. And after they did like the whole project where they were using the tools that we were learning in class throughout the steps of the project, they were asked to take some action steps. We talked about how it's important to bring awareness about the topic you're passionate about instead of just doing this to turn in for a grade. We want to make some impact at however small or big. And some of the students like sent a letter to the principal of the school about the concerns that they recognized, identified in their project. Another group of students, they decided to start this tutoring program for students who cannot, like, who don't have resources to, have private tutors, and they volunteer as a peer tutor. They posted some like social media posts and got some feedback and brought awareness about the topic that they were passionate about. And these are some student reflections or the letters that they gave me, and it's kind of awkward for me to read it. So maybe I'm gonna ask for Katie, do you mind reading this one using your voice?
Sure. All right, so what students said: throughout the year, you showed your intelligence and your passion for teaching by your engaging projects and lessons that did not just teach us the textbook curriculum. You took your time to connect lessons to real life applications, and you never treated us like just students. You understood us as authentic, unique human beings. You knew that some of us were just not meant to be future mathematicians, and so you took that and connected our passions with mathematics in a truly amazing way.
Yeah, so it was really powerful to hear this from the students because like they really saw like what I was doing and what I was like aiming at and being like treated as authentic, unique human beings instead of just test-taking robots. That was really powerful. And yeah, not everyone's gonna be future mathematicians, and that's perfectly okay, right? This quote came from a 12th grade student from my stats class. Can I ask Lamson to unmute if possible to read this out loud? Or how about Erica? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Sure. Not only have you made math fun and enjoyable, you introduced me to a way to use math to make a stand and a point. You gave me a new way to use math, one that isn't calculative and is instead analytical, and gave me every chance to use my voice and my passions in your class. It's rare that teachers give you every opportunity to make your work truly yours, and that has been my favorite part of the year.
Yeah, so this was like so powerful because this came from a student who was like suffering from mental health issues, and he was like actually in the hospital where he was not allowed to use internet for more than 1 hour a day, and he used that 1 hour that he was given to keep up with the work for the class by accessing the learning management system online and emailing me and communicating with me. And then when he came back on campus after 2 weeks of being hospitalized, like he gave me this like the project that he has been working on, and that was like so powerful that it was meaningful for him to do this work because he felt like he wanted to do this. And that he told me like this is the only class that he actually did the work for the 2 weeks that he was away from school. So next is ThinkShare. What ideas, strategies, or resources do you have for your own students? And or you can share what small steps can you take to start your PBL journey? What is that small step that you might want to take next week when you go back to work or school? So if you can take a minute to share that, and I'm going to turn it over to Gavin at this time. Let me stop sharing.
All right. So, and as you kind of think about what small steps you can take, or, or even just like what are some activities that you do in the classroom, or activities you support teachers to do, that can be shifted just slightly to a PBL framework. And so, as you're kind of thinking that, feel free to post ideas in the chat. I'm going to share a framework for kind of thinking about, and kind of with that, like some resources for thinking about project-based learning. And so there's a lot of terms that we've kind of slipped into, slipped into the into our presentation, and around kind of like thinking about authenticity and things like that. So I kind of want to name some of those as design principles for project-based learning. And so these design principles help us, or kind of act as guideposts for the decisions that we make during design. And that can be even just if we're shifting one small activity to frame it as a project, kind of how do we think about how to make those changes? Earlier, we thought about what values do we have? What do we want our curriculum to do? And so these are pedagogical commitments that we have in thinking about equity, and thinking about engagement, and thinking about social emotional learning. And so like, though, I think it's important to recognize that anything in any work we do, we need to bring those to the table and interpret design principles using those lenses, and kind of thinking about all of these design principles, but also we can kind of focus in on one or two. And so I wanted to, I'm going to share in the chat in a moment, a white paper that describes all of these design principles in great depth, and as a resource that you can, or you can choose not to read. But there's also some reflective questions at the end of that paper for thinking about the design principles, and thinking about kind of that are created to support you in creating project-based learning activities or curriculum. And so some of the design principles, like we kept bringing up, is authenticity or student agency. In what ways are they able to take it in different directions? Talked about the centrality of projects and the purpose for learning. So we're giving them a reason to learn besides we are telling them to as a teacher. The centrality of projects connects to that idea of it's the main course. It's not just the dessert. And I'm not going to, we're running short on time. I'm not going to kind of pour over these, but know that this exists. This is a resource for you, and kind of defining a few of these design principles and giving examples of some of these design principles in terms of giving students a purpose for learning. What is, kind of centering the projects in the curriculum, providing opportunities for authenticity, and like another term for that would be kind of application to the real world, and providing opportunities for student agency. We chose to zone in on these four as kind of a way to start thinking about it. And so like, I think when you start designing or shifting activities to be more project focused, thinking about how can I provide a purpose for them, of like a reason for doing this, and that can be a question of like, what's up with sinkholes, or, it can be, you are a farmer, you need to design a farm. Centering that project, and then kind of thinking about how are we making it authentic, and how are we providing students opportunities for agency. One small note I just want to make around authenticity is like, there's certainly authenticity to discipline. Is it, or subject area? Is it an authentic problem that experts or, scientists or mathematicians engage in? It's also really important, I would say essential, to think about in what ways is it authentic to students' lives. And kind of when I think of authenticity, it's the wedding of those two ideas, that it's authentic to our subject area and it's also authentic to students' lives. And I think project-based learning provides opportunities for those two things to meet. So kind of as we wrap up, we have so many resources we want to share. So this is just a few of them. It links to really good work, publications, organizations. There's some stuff, really good stuff around if you're working with anyone, and you need to support why project-based learning is valuable. I just want, like the Lucas Education Research, they've done a lot of recent research that demonstrates how rigorous project-based learning supports students. The students in project-based learning courses are doing better on valued tests and standardized tests, AP tests, things like that, than students in not project-based learning courses. So like, if there's ever kind of that resistance, there's research to support. You can say, here is research supporting this work. And then a lot of other just really good resources, videos, articles, so on and so forth. Finally, would love for you to take a survey based on the webinar today. Give us some feedback. We have QR code. We have the tiny URL. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll share that paper, but also I can share the tiny URL in the chat. You can just